Hey, English 9, hope you are doing well. Wanted to do a quick check-in here and give you a little bit of guidance on how we can use that two-tier structure we've been working on, pick it up and apply it to a longer work of fiction, in this case of Mice and Men. So what I want to do is I want to model something that's only using chapter 1, because I don't want to steal too much from you. But the goal here is to take some interesting pieces of evidence, embed them into our paragraph, but still to have our voices come through the most. So I want to show you how to use that two-tier structure as one way that you could go about doing that. So here's the prompt that I'm going to be writing on. The question is, how did John Steinbeck establish that George protects Lenny? This is actually really important. You'll notice that our author is a part of the prompt. When we talk about literary analysis, we end up talking about the author. Yes, the characters are important, but they're not real. John Steinbeck very much was. So everything we're looking at is what John Steinbeck did with these characters. So you're going to notice that, yes, I'm talking George and Lenny, but I'm also talking John Steinbeck. That's going to be our goal. So our question, of course, was how did John Steinbeck establish that George protects Lenny? I found 3 interesting quotes from chapter 1 that I thought were useful. Now, remember, you want to find at least 2 pieces of evidence. I chose 3, although the first and second ones are pretty much from the same section. So I'm going to kind of blend those together a little bit. But we need to make sure we have at least 2 pieces of evidence. Why? Because 2 equals a pattern. Pattern equals intent, meaning John Steinbeck did something intentionally. If it only happens once, it may have been, I don't want to say an accident, but like that's not a big enough thing where we can be like, he did this intentionally. But if we can say, well, look, he did it here and also here, and don't forget about this moment, all of a sudden we can show patterns. Pattern equal intent. So I found these 3 that I thought really kind of captured George protecting Lenny. So the question then becomes, how do we go about turning this into an actual paragraph? Well, I'm going to start just by kind of highlighting really quickly here, because we know that these are going to be our pink sentences. These are going to be our pieces of evidence. But we need to figure out how do they actually fit within a full paragraph here. So these are going to be the ones that I'm working with. I'm going to kind of just squinch down just a quick second here. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of model what I think about when I set out to write. So I know that my topic sentence is going to be all about what I'm trying to prove in this particular paragraph, right? Like, what is it that I want to accomplish? So I'm going to go ahead and kind of use my prompt as a little bit of a guide here. So I'm going to go ahead and do something like, in the first chapter of Mice and Men, I'm going to use the prompt here. I can always go back and change it up if I need to. Establishes that George is responsible for protecting Lenny. Words and actions. Because as I look at this evidence, like I feel like I'm looking at not only what he says to Lenny, but also things that he does for Lenny, right? Like these are things that he says. This is something that he actually does. And so because of that, I wanted to make sure I got words and actions, because that's what I'm trying to prove in this particular paragraph. It's what the evidence pushed me towards. His words and his actions all work toward protecting Lenny. All right, so I've got my topic sentence, and then I've got these moments, and I'm actually going to kind of do a little combining, just because I don't know if I feel like I want both. They both deal with the water, but they're not right next to each other. So I might actually kind of use like that ... feature we've talked a little bit about. But I'll kind of come back and polish this up. For now, I'm just going to say, like then George adds. And so I'm just going to kind of like combine these. And again, I can come back and polish that up a little bit. So now I'm kind of just thinking about it as like one piece of evidence or one chunk that I want to look at. And then I've got this other one that we're going to come to later. All right. So now I can't just jump here, right? We need to introduce the evidence. That's the I in tier. So this is all about that context here. So now I need to take a few moments. I can't just drop a quote bomb. I need to go ahead and kind of set up what's going on in this moment. So I'm going to take a few sentences to do that. You can do this in 1, 2, 3 sentences. Any more than that, we might be summarizing too much. But I think that that's kind of a good goal, is 1 to 3 sentences max. So I'll say something like, oops, sorry, let me get that in yellow for us. When we first meet our characters, because again, we're using kind of chapter 1. George and Lenny discover some water. So now I'm setting this scene, right? Like, don't drink so much. I'm not sure it's good water. Like, I need to establish that they've come across this stream of sorts. And then, of course, what prompts George to say, Lenny, for God's sakes, don't drink so much? What did Lenny do? I've got to set that up. So I'll say, Lenny, well, he did it like right away. So I'll do like, Lenny immediately throws his head into the water and begins drinking. George reacts quickly by telling him, boom, and now I can bring this right on up. So now, all this has done is kind of reminded my reader where it is we are in the story. When we first meet our characters, they come across some water, Lenny throws his head in, and George says, boom, and now we're off and running. Remember, I'm trying to prove that George protects Lenny through his words and his actions. This is focused on the words, right? And so George reacts quickly by telling him, Lenny, for God's sakes, don't drink so much. You're going to be sick like you was last night. I used kind of that ... to fill in a gap. Then George adds, I ain't sure it's good water. Looks kind of scummy. All right, so this is everything that George said. Now, on its own, that's a good start. But right now, I've kind of summarized what happened, and I used John Steinbeck's words. Now, we need to analyze what it is that Steinbeck is actually doing, or maybe the better thing is why, how he's doing it. So this is where our reasoning comes in, right? Why this evidence supports that topic sentence, why it is that those kind of like quotes that I found prove that George uses his words and his actions to protect Lenny. So now I'm going to go ahead and put this right on the author. So I'm actually going to begin with the author. So I'm going to start with like Steinbeck. I like the word establishes. I think that's a good thing, especially early on. So a few important traits here. First, like actually, I think we've got like a lot that we can unpack in this moment. First, that Lenny is not able to control his impulses because he throws his head right underwater. And secondly, well, I kind of want to put it back on George, right? Like that's the point of Steinbeck giving us this moment. So I'll say that George tries to teach Lenny how to protect himself a bit, right? Like certainly he's not going to solve everything, but he's kind of like, Lenny, like you're going to be sick. Like I'm warning you. Like I think that's really interesting. And the fact that, he says, you're going to be sick like you was last night. That means this is not like a one-time thing, right? This is a pattern of Lenny. So I kind of want to emphasize that. So maybe I'll say something like, George knows from past experiences that Lenny cannot control himself, nor can he determine what is or is not good drinking water. So here's kind of me coming back to the idea of like George using his words, right? So I'll say George takes it upon himself to try teach Lenny like these lessons. All right, so at this point, I've established one pretty good moment here of George protecting Lenny, not by necessarily doing anything physically, but by telling him things, right? That absolutely goes back to my topic sentence, and that's what we want, right? Everything we write goes back to proving that topic sentence. All right, so right now I've got that first tier, topic sentence, intro the evidence, evidence, reasoning. And I was a little bit flexible with kind of how I used these moments. But what I like about this is as I look, the most dominant color is blue. The most dominant part of the structure is the reasoning. My words, what I kind of thought John Steinbeck was doing. So yeah, I used Steinbeck's words, but really it's out of everything I could pull, I want to explain why I chose those. That's why the reasoning is so incredibly important. All right, cool. Phone call from spam. All right, we're going to keep rolling. All right, so now I want to go ahead and move on to this next piece of evidence, but I can't just bring this up here, right? If all of a sudden I just bring this up, the reader's like, and teach Lenny these lessons. You never had none. It's like, whoa, what in the world just happened, right? Like, we need to slow down here and create a little bit of context. And we need to transition our other T. Boom. So topic sentence. Now we're going to do that transition here. So I want to show that there's another moment, right? Like another moment where George is protecting Lenny. This time, through his actions. But because I'm adding something in, if I'm adding, I'm thinking in addition. So that's one of my easy transitions that I go to. So in addition, and now I need to go back and kind of set this up with some context. I can't just say in addition, you never had none. Well, who's talking? What's going on, right? Like, I need to go ahead and kind of set this up a little bit. So let me go ahead and once again introduce now the new evidence by providing a little bit of context. So I'm going to say, in addition, we see early on, and I'm using we as like the reader, because I don't want to say I, but it's something we are experiencing, how much Lenny depends on George. Because this to me is about like those work tickets, those work cards, and he needs George. So George is doing something like physically, he's doing something, not just saying something to help protect him a little bit. But I still got to set this up, right? I can't just say Lenny depends on George. You never had none. I need more than that. So what's going on? When George and Lenny are discussing their work cards, I'm actually going to use parentheses, which just kind of like is like, hey, like quick reminder, little additional thing here. Not needed, but I think it's kind of a nice thing to mix in. So I'll say which they need to get a future job. Lenny panics and thinks he lost it, right? That's what prompts this in the first place. Why does George say you never had none? It's because Lenny panics and thinks he lost his. Now, I just need to go ahead and establish that it's George talking. So I'll say like, fortunately, George tells him, boom. So now I know who's talking. George tells him, you never had none. Boom, we're off and running again here. Oops, just realized I've got a wrong page number there. There we go. All right, so this looks awesome. Cool. You think I'd let you carry your own work card? So another great moment here. This time it's one of George's actions, right? He's carrying this work card. And so, yes, he tells him, he says it, but he's also doing something physically. Coming back to the idea of like protecting Lenny. But now I've got to sell this, right? Like I've got to sell that George carrying the work card is another example of George being responsible for protecting Lenny and taking on that responsibility, right? So now I need to go ahead and just kind of explain why I chose this moment. So really, I chose this moment because in this moment we see that George recognizes that Lenny struggles. I think that's a huge part of this. And the work card is really important. In fact, it's too important to let Lenny just kind of carry around on his own, right? So I'll say, and the work card is too important to trust Lenny with. But then I want to keep going here, right? Because that on its own, like I need to drive home like that responsibility. Like that's one of my favorite words that I end up kind of using up here as I look back at it is George feels responsible for Lenny, even though he doesn't have to, he feels responsible. So I want to kind of come back to that. So therefore, George takes it upon himself to carry both his work card and Lenny's. And I can keep going here. So really driving home like why this is such a big deal that like George is able to recognize this and Lenny can't. So like I'll say if this card is lost, Lenny would not be able to get a job. And here's why that matters. Like not only is it just like a job, but Like that means not eating, making any money. Ah. I still feel like I want to do something with my reasoning here because I haven't talked about Steinbeck yet. And as I said, like Steinbeck's in our prompt, right? Steinbeck's in our topic sentence. I want to keep coming back to that. I did it here. I said Steinbeck establishes. I haven't talked about Steinbeck yet. So I'm going to kind of sneak in another line here. And it doesn't have to be here in yours that you do it, but somewhere in that reasoning, bringing the author in, I think, is what we want to do. So I'm just going to keep it simple and just say, like, here, Steinbeck is once again creating the responsible act by George. And I chose that word act intentionally just because, again, we're talking about actions. So I intentionally kind of wanted to pull this idea of act. I think that's important. So now I've got like, here's what George says. Here's what George does through an action. And yeah, I think that's a pretty solid paragraph. Now we can also have that wrap up sentence, which just kind of ties us together a little bit. So I want to go ahead and just kind of close this out and put those two back together. So when I think about the two moments that I've captured so far, I just can say, hey, one happened on page 3, one happened on page 5. So we're early. So I'm just going to say, like, as early as chapter 1, go with our word that we've been working on, infer. We can infer that George cares for Lenny because of John Steinbeck's descriptive writing of George's words and actions. You know what? I felt almost like too close to that topic sentence. I already established the word and actions. I can trust my reader. I'm just going to back this up and end it with descriptive writing. On its own, that wouldn't be enough, but because I've done the whole paragraph, I don't know if I need to say words and actions again. I think they get it. So now all of a sudden, as we look back, this comes together really well. Remember, we started with just those pieces of evidence, but by filling in what's going on before, the yellow, we've created context. And by making sure that we've committed to the blue sections, the reasoning, we've had our voice come through more than anything else. And that's exactly what we want. All right. So this is a great example of using that 2-tier structure to craft a literary analysis paragraph. Now, there are many ways to write a good paragraph, but this is a great structure to kind of use to fall back on and to make sure that you are setting everything up. The big struggle that we see oftentimes in English 9 is cutting out the yellow, and we're just, boom, dropping quote bombs, and or not having enough of the reasoning. By breaking it down like this, I think we really get to establish some really good writing skills. So folks, use this as your guide. Use it certainly today. Use it in the future. We'll keep coming back to it. But this is a great one. And remember, this all started just by identifying 2 pieces of evidence and building from there. Folks, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you're doing well. I'm excited to see you in a few weeks. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, then hopefully I'll be able to get back to you. But please take advantage of all the resources that you have available to you as well. Take care, folks.